Welcome to episode 44 of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, a bi-weekly look at cybersecurity, including interviews, news, expert tips, and the latest trends. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my Firewalls.com colleague, Andrew Harmon.
Hello out there.
Hey, Andrew. And in here as well. As we tackle a different featured topic each episode, new ones are normally out every other Wednesday, so subscribe or follow on your favorite podcasting platform to get the latest first. Please do rate and review us and drop us a line anytime at podcast@firewalls.com. As always, thanks for listening, and now it's time to introduce our featured topic and our guest for this episode.
While the exact number varies, somewhere north of 90% of all cyber attacks rely on email to reach their nefarious aims. The goal, when boiled down to its most basic, is to trick both email security into letting a message through and an email recipient into interacting with that message by clicking a link, opening attachment, or some other action they shouldn't take. And because email security and users are both getting smarter, bad actors are constantly looking for new ways to stay ahead of the curve.
And to discuss one of the most recently discovered methods to infiltrate your inbox and more from the cybersecurity world, we welcome security researcher, engineer, and tech columnist Ax Sharma. Ax, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, guys, for having me here.
To get started, we saw an article that you just did last week as we record this called Attackers Can Hide External Sender Email Warnings with HTML and CSS. And that's in Bleeping Computer. So first off, could you give us a little bit of an overview of what that article was about?
Absolutely, happy to. So I saw this tweet. It's by Louis Diomarcil, the researcher, and very relatable. It has a screenshot of, every one of us uses different email clients with those external sender warnings. Many times, especially if, you've worked in a corporate workplace using Microsoft Outlook, whatever, you see this email was received from an external sender, please use caution before clicking any links. So that got my attention. And obviously, at first, I thought, is this a flaw in a specific, email program, Outlook? And it turned out that's not quite the case.
Yeah, so the flaw appears to be in the type of email rather than the provider.
So it turns out when I, interviewed the researcher and a few others jumped in, what's essentially happening is the email security products used by companies, right? Email gateways, firewalls, spam filters. Some of these can be configured to add an external sender warning, right? If anybody in your organization is receiving an email from non-yourcompany.com email address, these products will append like the external sender message, but they do that to the email body itself via HTML, CSS. And I guess the really aha moment of this, particular method is if I am an attacker, right, emailing your organization, I can simply inject some HTML and CSS rules to hide such messages. That way I can just hide it so you wouldn't see that this message is coming from an external sender.
Right. And so what is the importance, I guess, of identifying an external sender? How does that add an extra layer of security for users?
So let's assume most users, right? I mean, obviously I'm speaking as a cybersecurity person, but a lot of users, they might be like naive. They can't always tell, right? What is a legitimate domain? What is phishing? What is not phishing? And say like your company is called Firewalls.com, right? I could register something like Firewalls.com something, right? And unless a user is really tech savvy, they may not be able to spot that is this a, at firewalls.com email address or not. So the reason these external sender warnings were added by email gateways was just a way, an additional security measure to make it easy for non-tech savvy users to know that, this message is suspicious, be careful about it. But now that that warning is removed, and another researcher also, let me just look up their name. Yeah, he also said that it can also be modified in some ways, right? So this kind of defeats the purpose of that protection. And again, this is more so for users who are not so, technically savvy.
Yeah, just to cause them to take a beat basically and take another look and not just assume that it's all above board. But I think the other piece that you just mentioned was interesting as well, that this code could actually be used to alter the warning. And, for those non-tech savvy folks, sometimes the right language in some type of warning might end up being more devastating than whatever you can put in the email.
Exactly. Jean Mace is the name of the person who told me that you could even fake HTML and CSS. I mean, it's simple, right? If I'm an attacker emailing, say an HR person in your organization, and I can just inject a CSS rule to hide the legitimate warning, and I can inject some HTML that is kind of imitation of that warning, but saying something like this email is from your organization, it is safe, something like that. Yeah. So both possibilities are there.
Right. And so this is all happening just right in the email itself, correct? This is a pretty easy. You just write it into the body of your email and that's about it. Is there any other way to defend against this other than just using text-only emails?
Yeah, great question. So this is, I think, one of the reasons Microsoft Exchange, they proposed like native solution to this, which they're calling native external sender callouts. They've introduced this in Outlook, maybe like any other products, right, that uses Microsoft Exchange server. Like there's Outlook, there's Microsoft 365. So what this feature does is it adds like external sender label within the UI itself. So it takes the power away from the sender. Like it doesn't matter what the email says. If it is an external email, I'll say Outlook's, right? Outlook's user interface will have a separate label within the Outlook window showing the external tag. So this cannot be manipulated then by an attacker.
Have you heard of any other providers that are going down the same route, or is it probably just one of those things that once Exchange and Microsoft does it, that others will probably follow suit?
That's one of the things. Other thing just before this podcast, I Googled and came across, I don't want to I know Microsoft became relevant in this conversation, right? Because a lot of people were thinking, is this a flaw in Outlook? What are they doing? But I mean, this is a vendor agnostic flaw, right? You could be using Gmail, Thunderbird, doesn't matter. So I mean, like, I think some email gateways like Proofpoint, they inject the external keyword in the subject line rather than the email body. So again, some protection, right? Because like subject lines, not so easy for the attacker to, I guess they can say safe, but then it will be caught. So I'm sure other vendors are working on it as well.
Gotcha. And so as far as how we kind of got to this point now, was the HTML and CSS external warning system as it currently stands just kind of a quick way to patch this system? Just one very quick and easy way to add another layer of security that they didn't quite, think through and see this flaw potentially popping up in the future?
Well, so I think one of the things that they did foresee, HTML, right? Unless you enable it by default, it's disabled. So that policy option was always there. That is, do you want to enable in your email client, regardless of whether it's Outlook or anything else? Do you want to enable, loading HTML and images automatically, or do you prefer sticking to loading just, plain text? So I think it's one of those things that, the policy implementation was always there. Nobody just actively realized or paid much attention to this. And that's why when I saw this tweet, I myself had an aha moment, like, how did we not realize this all these years?
Right.
Yeah, the HTML emails were not born yesterday, that's for sure.
Correct.
So yeah, just backing up a little bit, speaking as someone in the field, email is pretty much the major way that infiltrations of any kind occur. So this is something that obviously is sort of a big deal for organizations that have, employees being sort of that last line of defense.
Correct, definitely. And I think that's why, cybersecurity education, or I don't want to make it sound boring, but there's many ways. I know some companies in the space that are doing it, whether it's Ninja, curricula, just the way it's interactive cybersecurity education, right? So it's not like a boring, like click next. It's like, I think for non-technical users, it's an excellent way to help them learn about cybersecurity through a storyline, through animations, cartoons, all that. That just gets the message across much better than having them read boring manuals.
Right.
So otherwise, the fix, as Andrew mentioned, and as you mentioned, we do have the email clients that come with the HTML turned off unless you activate it basically within an email. But that's really just not a practical solution to just say, I'm never getting an HTML email ever again.
Of course, it's not. It's just one of the ways. That's why, like I said, I think it's more to do with how, like administrators in a company can set these policies as well. So like you don't have to, I guess, use an email gateway that is injecting these warnings using HTML, CSS. Like look for injecting it, in the subject line, or using this like the native solution I talked about that Outlook or Exchange is about to roll out.
Right. So switching gears a little bit to some of your other work, other articles recently involve the Facebook data scraping. So could you give us a quick explanation? What exactly is the difference between data scraping and a classic conventional breach?
That's a great question. So data scraping, right, mostly refers to just going over anything like that's in public domain. And let me kind of clarify that a bit. So if I have a public profile, right, or a public website, somebody scrapes data from there, I don't consider that a breach, right? Like users put some data, about themselves publicly in their public profiles and that gets scraped. That's different. Now, that is not the case in Facebook's, this incident. That's not what happened here. Because although Facebook has attributed these like 533 million users data leak to a scraping, right? Not hacking. I think a key point that, didn't go much into was this happened due to a bug. Basically, due to a bug, attackers could match, like users' phone numbers against Facebook, like run it through an API and collect the details from their profiles, Facebook's contact importer feature to be specific. So this is like slightly different from public information scraping, right? That's where I'm coming from. That's where many experts have come from on Twitter, if you see.
Yeah, this is not this breach, as you said. 533 million users had some information basically publicly out there or posted after however it was gathered. But yeah, this was not a case of each one of these people on their Facebook profile posted their birth dates and their phone numbers for all to see publicly. This was something that, required some doing on the back end. And it was because Facebook allowed it to happen, basically.
Yeah, exactly. And it was, I think, Alon Gal, he's the CTO of Hudson Rock. He had brought this incident to everyone's attention. And then Troy Hunt, well-known security expert, jumped on it. He's, have I been pawned right now? Lets you search if your data was leaked as a part of this incident. And there are many other tools users can use.
So where exactly is the balance between, I guess, the responsibility of the users to have that data publicly floating out there, not publicly, quote unquote, versus Facebook to sort of make it harder to match all this publicly available data together and sort of piece it into usable, actionable information?
Right. I always say, obviously it's a big responsibility on companies, right? The larger they become and, having that awareness that users are going to make mistakes. They're not going to always know where they are sharing their information, even if they click, I accept the terms of use, right? I think there in the beginning, especially when say Facebook or social media was, upcoming, I think there was a disconnect between the user perception of how social media is supposed to work and how it actually worked. And I think if you lived in different countries, you'd get this like across different cultures. In the US, for example, or any, Western country, a lot of people would voluntarily put data about themselves publicly that they would not realize it's public, right? Some people's LinkedIn profiles have their date of birth on them. Same for Twitter, same for Facebook profiles. And then later on, for example, as a complete stranger know this, you'll be like, oh my gosh, how do you know this? Are you stalking me? Well, no, you put this about yourself. So do you get what I'm saying? I'm not trivializing the user, but I think the best strategy is, yes, as a user, you need to be very careful as well where you're putting data and just knowing every single field where all it may be exposed.
So, when you talk about data protection laws, and there are different laws in different countries, obviously, do you have a feeling that, Facebook could face any kind of penalties for this data leak, data loss, however, data scrape, however you'd like to characterize?
So last I checked, I think one of the EU data regulators, it's the Data Protection Commission in Ireland, they were investigating this incident. Obviously, I'm not well versed in law to see, or to comment on where this may end. Yeah, but I think it really depends on, for a global company, right, what individual laws in every country can do.
Right. And Ireland seems to be going pretty heavy on the big tech companies, legally speaking, lately. So I would imagine we'll see that one pop up sometime soon.
So in terms of, just an overarching statement on this, Facebook has sort of, I think it's fair to say, downplayed this as an issue. How important, in your opinion, is it for a company to sort of own when things like this do occur on their watch?
I think being transparent always helps. And to be honest, I see everyone's perspective here. I see this data resurfaced, on a forum and it just freaked people out. And I think I see Facebook's initial reaction was like, this is not news. This had happened in 2019. It had been patched. I think it rubbed some people the wrong way, right? It rubbed them off the wrong way. And so that's like, I'm just going over this again, that's what happened. But I think it just makes sense to be transparent, to come out clean, to tell the user what steps, companies have taken, what can they do to safeguard themselves. Because I think people respect that more than if you try to sort of maneuver around an incident.
Right. Well, and if people are just finding out about this, the fact that it occurred in 2019 and just finding out now that this is out there, then yeah, that's a bit unsettling if they know that Facebook already was somewhat aware of it, but they weren't.
Yeah, so just to be clear, and this is from Facebook's original, report, the facts on news reports about Facebook data, and they linked to a CNET report from 2019, which said the unsecured server exposed phone numbers that could be matched with Facebook accounts. So just when I say this is where they're coming from, that's it, that it was reported in 2019, and then the news resurfaced in 2021.
Right. Anything else you wanted to add on either topic we talked about today?
I think I'm good, but just watch out for any threats to make sure you're not putting your information anywhere you don't trust. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
Double check your email senders.
Yes, please.
So, Axe, where can people find some of your work?
I write for Bleeping Computers, CSO Online, Sonatype blog, also expanding to other outlets, which I'll not name yet, but yeah, keep an eye.
We will keep an eye out.
Yep. Thank you again very much for joining us today, Axe.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
And now it's time for headlines. In this regular segment, we take a look at some of the top cybersecurity news stories out there today and what they may mean to you. Now, headline number one. Hackers threaten to release DC police data in apparent ransomware attack. So, Washington, D.C.'s police department has confirmed its servers have been breached after hackers began leaking its data online. In a statement, the department confirmed it was aware of unauthorized access on our server and said it was working with the FBI to investigate the incident. So, what's been hacked?
Right. So obviously a lot of very sensitive data to be had in a police department server. In this particular case, this includes details of arrest records, persons of interest, and as well, it has been threatened that if the police department does not reach out to these attackers, that they will begin leaking information about even police informants to the gangs that they are informing on. So potentially even some lives in danger at this point.
Yeah, a little added layer to a typical ransomware type of attack. So it's believed to be the work of a Babook Locker, a ransomware group, and Bleeping Computer reports that the gang has already released screenshots of the 250 gigabytes of data that it's allegedly stolen. So, yeah, they've already shown some proof that they've taken some data here.
Right, and this is the D.C. Metropolitan Police, not the Capitol Police. However, there is claimed to be some files related to the arrests made in the January Capitol riots, so a little bit of overlap in those stories.
Yeah, so Babook actually has a data leak site, and a message on it says, "Hello, even an institution such as DC can be threatened. We have downloaded a sufficient amount of information from your internal networks, and we advise you to contact us as soon as possible to prevent leakage. If no response is received within 3 days, we will start to contact gangs in order to drain the informants. We will continue to attack the state sector of the USA, FBI, CSA. We find 0 day before you. Even larger attacks await you soon." So.
I mean, it's pretty straightforward, but interesting message. This is the third police department that's been targeted in just the last 2 months, according to the New York Times. So there was a department in Maine as well as one in California. These are turning out to be pretty ripe targets, as a lot of these departments, especially in smaller towns, have some pretty outdated software and systems in place, which make them particularly ripe for attack.
Yeah, you would think that a large one like the DC Metro would have a little bit better software and network systems in place. But, the two other police departments that were reported by the New York Times to have been attacked recently are much, much smaller places than DC. So they jumped to the big time pretty quick on third time's the charm, I guess, there.
Right, and I think with the SolarWinds hack, which we'll talk about a little more, and all the different government agencies and Fortune 500 companies that were hacked, maybe it's not a matter of how advanced and up-to-date their defenses are. It's just very hard to play defense in the cybersecurity world.
Yeah, but definitely another layer. We've talked about all these different government entities before, and local governments and schools and hospitals and everything. But yeah, this is a little bit different wrinkle with a police department, and as we'll talk about a little bit later, again, another situation where it's not just encrypting files and demanding ransom for decryption. It's also saying, hey, we took all of your files too, and we can post them somewhere.
Yeah, and this is definitely sending alarm bells up all over the place. So the Biden administration's expected to start putting out some executive orders soon in regards to cybersecurity defenses. The Justice Department's got a task force put together for ransomware attacks. So it sounds like the government is finally waking up a little to all these attacks and starting to slowly but surely get the gears rolling forward.
Yeah, they're getting pretty hard to ignore because of not only how widespread they are, but just the size of the targets and the damage that can be done to each one.
Yeah, and it seems like attackers are getting more and more creative with these. And, as we like to wildly speculate on this show, there's all sorts of hidden implications that could still be lying out there, depending on what kind of entities are hit next and what kind of data that might have available that can, as this story shows, can very quickly cross over into real-world implications.
Yeah, absolutely. We love wild speculation, and we'll continue to wildly speculate about our next two stories. Now, headline number 2. Report. Russia likely kept access to U.S. networks after SolarWinds hack. That's kept access. So that means even though we've been talking for months now about the fact that Russia was the apparent culprit behind the SolarWinds breach, sources tell CNN that Russia's SVR intelligence agency likely still has access to American networks, despite efforts to close exploits.
And this makes sense to me. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of people were hit, and while patches were made available, you can't guarantee that the horse drinks the water you lead them to in the end. So, I mean, recently we had the Microsoft Exchange server issue where there's kind of a bit of an unprecedented step where the FBI went in and actively closed some of those loopholes on companies' behalf, just proactively taking care of them. But from what I know, this SolarWinds hack, that has not been done in any way.
Yeah, this one was very widespread, and I guess the other angle to this is saying that Russia's still watching, in spite of the fact that they have been sanctioned by the Biden administration now formally. President Biden has expelled 10 Russian diplomats from Washington, D.C., including members of intelligence services in response to a variety of actions, but including the SolarWinds hack. And the White House also imposed sanctions on 32, quote, entities and individuals as an answer to reported 2020 election interference attempts.
Yeah, that's kind of the catch-22 there. Is you've already thrown the diplomats out. What do you do now that they've decided they're going to continue attacking? Throw them out extra hard?
Yeah. So the president formally blamed the Russia-backed cyber attack group Cozy Bear, aka APT-29, as the culprit behind the SolarWinds breach. The FBI, NSA, and CISA have also issued a joint cybersecurity advisory warning of vulnerabilities Russian intelligence used to compromise networks. So, yeah, a lot of formal action. Even just a month or two ago, we weren't officially naming Russia as the culprit, just that they were heavily, connected to this. But the U.S. government has.
Right, and this response isn't completely new or unheard of. So Russia had sanctions placed against them during the Obama administration in 2016. Same thing with 2018 as far as election midterm interference is concerned, and that didn't change anything, so to speak. Here we are in 2021 talking about it again. And I imagine, another slap on the wrist isn't going to do anything further.
Yeah, and that's the tricky part of this. In the diplomacy side of things, the sanctions are pretty much all you have to offer to punish another nation state for potentially engaging in hacking of your information. But if they don't care, then
right. It's like sending a strongly worded letter. If they're not going to read it, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Deputy National Security Advisor Ann Neuberger didn't directly acknowledge to CNN that Russia was still in these systems, but did say that formally blaming them was meant to, quote, shape Russia's calculus on the value of hacks. So sort of hopefully make them think twice about doing it in the future, I guess.
Yeah, I guess if you call them out by name instead of just quote unquote some attackers, maybe moving forward they'll know in their equation that they will be blamed at least, and perhaps that will tip it in the favor of not attacking. But according to the article's author, that's probably not going to be the case.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the 2016, 2018 stuff that have already led to some sanctions, and that didn't dissuade anybody. So, yeah, fool me once, shame on.
Right.
Well, you just can't fool me twice.
I hear that's a saying in Tennessee and maybe in Texas as well.
Just can't fool me again, I think is I messed it up there a little bit. But
well, as we said in the last article headline, defense is hard.
And in the next article, we'll talk about just how much you have to defend against. Now, headline number 3. This one's kind of a two-parter, but sort of providing some overall perspective on where things stand with ransomware in particular. So ransomware extortion demands are growing, and so is the downtime caused by attacks. That's a ZDNet story. And ransomware, don't expect a full recovery however much you pay. That's Sophos 2021 State of Ransomware Report. So let's start with the first one. The average ransom payment paid by victims of ransomware attacks has risen as cybercriminals exploit vulnerabilities in software and remote desktop protocol services as common means of infiltrating networks. That's according to analysis by cybersecurity company Coveware's quarterly ransomware report.
Right, and that report goes on to outline that in the first 3 months of this current year, 2021, the average ransom was about $220,298. It's an oddly specific number, but probably just an average, I assume.
Yeah.
And that is an increase from the first 3 months of 2020. At the same time frame, the average ransom was about $154,000. So that's, a pretty good 35% growth rate.
Yeah, that's a pretty good chunk of change there. And they mention the activity of a number of notorious ransom groups being sort of a cause for the ransom payments going up, because some of the bigger groups just ask for more money because they're targeting bigger places too. This also goes on to mention the most common type of ransomware in 2021, which is Sodinokibi, which accounts for 14% of attacks, followed by Conti, which is behind 10%. Lockbit is the third most with 7.5%. eGregor is the fifth most. So a lot of different variants out there, and we've mentioned a number of them already in different stories that we've had.
Right, and they give a little bit of a also participated list, and Ryuk is on there, which surprised me that actually wasn't higher on ransomware market share, because we heard and spoke about Ryuk a lot over the last year or two. Same with DarkSide,
yeah,
so I would have expected those to be higher on the list.
Mm-hmm. So one technique that is helping to make ransomware attacks more successful for cyber criminals is what we just talked about relating to the DC police ransomware attack, and that is to publish data they've stolen while inside the network, something that really used to not be a thing, but it continues to grow. According to analysis by Coveware, now 77% of ransomware attacks involve a threat to leak exfiltrated data. Now, that's only up 10% compared to the final quarter of 2020, but if you look back a couple of years, I think that number is way, way higher than it used to be.
Let's say 10% per quarter is nothing to blink at. So this is something that the Naked Security post also talks about as well, that perhaps ransomware is no longer the most appropriate name for this type of extortion. It's really blackmail of all sorts at this point, whether that mean more than just locking up your files, but leaking that data to the public, using things similar to the DC police one, where they are going to start trying to use the sensitive data that can actually affect the operations of that department to sort of get some extra action and drive up that price.
Yeah, and we know that some of the more targeted personal types of ransomware attacks like to claim that they've had access to like your browsing history or your webcam to post some sort of compromising information about you. So that follows that whole blackmail suit that's just taking it to a bigger level when you're dealing with an organization.
Right, and that is very much a reason why we've seen these numbers balloon up, is that more so over the years, we are no longer targeting computer by computer, home end users, but they're locking down entire networks for large organizations, and that kind of when you've impacted the business to the point of an entire shutdown for the day and they're, worried about losing $1 million in productivity, then suddenly the ransom of $200,000 is a bit more palatable to get paid off.
And the calculus changes too with the exfiltration of the data, because maybe your company has been attacked, but you are pretty good about your backups and everything, and you can restore from a pretty recent place. But if that data is out there as well, then you still may want to go ahead and just pay the ransom to prevent it from really getting out there.
Right, and these stories talk about even the idea of hacking groups putting together these negative PR teams where they'll go on the dark web and talk crap about your company and how bad your security is, and that can be pretty embarrassing for a lot of companies to see their name besmirched that way. I don't know that the average consumer interacting with these companies is going to go check the dark web and see if they've been bad-mouthed in a hacker forum, but it's still out there and very easily could become a big public stink for that company down the road.
And it also, spreads the word to other potential bad actors that they may want to come at you next. So,
right.
Yeah. In general, one final note from the Coveware report: almost half of ransomware attacks began with remote desktop protocol services in this first quarter, either by using stolen credentials, guessing default or common passwords. Listen to our previous episode if you want to learn more about that. Or by exploiting unpatched vulnerabilities. And there has also been a rise in software vulnerabilities being exploited as a means of infiltrating networks, particularly when it comes to VPN applications. So both of these areas, remote desktop protocol and VPN, speak to the fact that we are in a continuing remote work environment.
Yeah, that's definitely two services that in 2020 especially were very vulnerable, low-hanging fruit, and not surprised to see them here.
Mm-hmm. So back to the Sophos State of Ransomware report. You mentioned some information already from that. And this is a number that has followed suit in a couple of different places still. As much as we hear about ransomware, the actual volume of attacks is down according to their survey. So 37% of organizations were hit by ransomware last year. That's defined as multiple computers being impacted by an attack. And going back the year prior, that number was 51%. So, and the year a few years before that, it was 54%. So the overall number of these attacks has actually gone down a bit. It's just that the effect of them and the public nature of many of them has, I think, gone up quite a bit.
Right. And in addition to that, these are becoming more sophisticated attacks, which obviously the volume will have to dial down just a little bit as you make these more personalized and start really spear phishing and targeting specific people in the organization, trying to grab certain credentials. So it makes sense that overall volume would go down while the problem itself is kind of staying about the same or worsening. It's just that it's becoming more and more involved on both the hacker sides and the victim side.
Right. So getting some other statistics from this report, one of the key kind of takeaways that Sophos is talking about is actually the fact that paying up does not guarantee that you get everything back. So the survey says companies that either decided to pay up or were forced to do so, of those, about 1/3 of them got less than half of their data back, and about half of them lost more than 1/3 of their data. And actually 4% of those victims who paid up got nothing at all, and only 8% claimed to have recovered everything by paying the extortion. So basically 1 in 10 odds of getting all of your data back if you actually do pay the ransom.
Right. So even if you do worry about your data being leaked to the public and all these other implications that we talked about, it is still a good idea to back up your data, because at the end of the day, even if you pay the ransom, you might not be getting it back. So it's good to have copies.
Yeah, so more than 50% losing a third of their precious files and 92% losing at least something. That's quite a bit. Yeah, so you just can't rely on your cybersecurity insurance to, foot the bill and everything's back to normal after you get your data back. And, it's not even clear necessarily that the ransomware groups are intentionally breaking all of this data. It could just be,
unintended side effects.
Yeah.
So something I liked from this Naked Security story from Sophos in particular is they highlighted sort of the history of ransomware. In particular, the first case that they tracked down was from 1989, and this was actual
Isn't that
floppy
a Taylor
disks.
Swift album?
Yeah, it was. I don't know if that's related or not.
I think it must be.
But in this ransomware scheme, one of the first known, they would send actual floppy diskettes through the mail to people with instructions to put them in their computer so that they can learn about AIDS and HIV protection. And then once in the computer, their files would be locked about 3 months later, and they had to pay a payment of $378 to an address in Panama.
Sounds complicated.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot more involved than just putting some Bitcoin in there and calling it a day.
I wonder how many people actually paid the ransom and how that all worked. I guess how much time would have had to have passed.
Yeah, well. It's hard to say how they converted on that. I guess it'd be interesting to see the final analytics and see how many of these disks were even sent and reached their final destination, let alone anybody falling for it. But I'm sure somebody did.
I mean, it seems like some sort of scam like that could have even existed before computers or something.
Yeah.
Like maybe somebody went to the library and took some of the books or something, or hid them somewhere, and
you won't get your precious books back until you pay me.
Yeah. Then they sent their Pony Express out to to the range.
Dead drop some gold in the desert, and you'll get your books back.
Yeah.
The old 1889.
Right. But yeah, that's interesting. And you can see in that particular piece, what they were sort of making a point of was how difficult it was even for the people attempting to gain from that particular version of ransomware back then. So that's why it took a while to really take off as its modern form, really.
Yeah, and then once Bitcoin came onto the scene and you had this sort of untraceable international currency, kind of caught fire for everybody.
Yeah, and now it's pretty much everywhere. So we're closing in on now about a decade of ransomware being a much bigger thing, and it continues to evolve in ways that suggest it's not going anywhere anytime soon.
Right.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast. And thanks again to our guest, Ax Sharma, for joining us. Check out the links in the description for more information about everything we discussed. Subscribe or follow now, however you listen, to ensure you get our latest episodes as soon as they're available. And please do rate and review us. Visit Firewalls.com for all your network security needs, and give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. For Andrew Harmon, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll be back soon with another episode, but in the meantime, we remind you to get secure, stay secure.